Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I honestly can't believe we're still having this conversation because what should have been a very straightforward situation has somehow turned into one of the biggest debates in the WNBA. And to absolutely nobody's surprise, the narrative has completely flipped. Instead of talking about what Alyssa Thomas actually did on the court, people are suddenly acting like she's the victim. Apparently, the real problem isn't the play itself. The real problem is the reaction. It's the big bad WNBA, and it's the big bad Caitlin Clark fans. That's the story some people are trying to tell, and I honestly don't understand how we got here. Let's remember exactly what happened. Alyssa Thomas got involved in an incident where she jumped on a player, drove a knee into a player who had previously been dealing with a groin injury, caught that player in the throat during the sequence, and then, as everything was ending, appeared to try to stomp on the player while getting up. Whether you're a Fever fan, a Mercury fan, or a neutral basketball fan, that's the sequence everyone watched. What's even crazier is that this didn't happen in isolation. Just 2 days earlier, Alyssa Thomas had already been involved in another controversial play involving Caitlin Clark after swinging an elbow in her direction. So this wasn't just one isolated incident that appeared out of nowhere. It happened after another play that had already created plenty of discussion. Then the suspension comes down. 1 game. That's it. 1 single game. And somehow, people are acting like Alyssa Thomas received the harshest punishment imaginable. I'm sitting here wondering what everyone else is watching, because this wasn't some massive suspension, it wasn't multiple games, it wasn't some season-ending punishment, it was literally 1 game. That's about as lenient as you can realistically expect while still holding a player accountable. Then you start seeing reactions online. Christy Tolliver posts the famous Michelle Obama quote, "When they go low, we go high." And I'm thinking to myself, what exactly are we doing here? Nobody even seems interested in discussing the actual play anymore. Instead, the conversation immediately becomes about Alyssa Thomas supposedly being treated unfairly. Suddenly, she's the victim. Suddenly, everyone else is the problem. It's honestly remarkable how quickly the entire conversation changed. Then you had Dejanay Carrington getting involved on social media. At first, it looked like one post had been removed, then reposted, then shared again because it was trending. The entire situation just became confusing. Meanwhile, people were posting comments saying Alyssa Thomas was somehow being unfairly targeted. Others were responding by calling her one of the dirtiest players in women's basketball history. Whether you agree with those opinions or not, it just shows how divided the conversation has become. Then things got even stranger. Apparently, an assistant coach with the Mercury was publicly defending Alyssa Thomas. Again, I don't understand how anyone watches that sequence and comes away believing Alyssa Thomas was somehow the victim. She's the one who initiated the physical contact. She's the one who ended up receiving the suspension. That's why the league reviewed the play in the first place. At some point, accountability has to matter. Now, I've seen people describe the entire discussion as mass delusion. Honestly, I can understand why they're saying that. It reminds me of those ridiculous AI videos where somebody edits together fake Lou Dort highlights and suddenly he's flying across the court kicking people before the video becomes completely absurd. Sometimes online discussions reach a point where reality almost disappears. People stop talking about what actually happened and instead start arguing about completely different narratives. That's exactly what this feels like. We've already seen how emotional conversations surrounding Caitlin Clark can become. Even situations involving completely unrelated to basketball somehow end up being blamed on Caitlin Clark fans. That's why I honestly believe that no matter what happens, there are always going to be people who somehow twist the story into saying Caitlin Clark or her supporters are responsible. That's the pattern we've continued to see. But when I watched this incident, I didn't think it was complicated. I thought it was one of the easiest disciplinary decisions the league could possibly make.
The player who committed the actions received a one-game suspension. End of story. Instead, we've somehow spent days debating whether Alyssa Thomas deserves sympathy. I honestly don't get it. You can absolutely support your teammate behind closed doors. Every organization does that. Every locker room does that. But publicly pretending nothing happened is a completely different conversation. It actually reminds me of last season when Angel Reese defended Chennedy Carter after the hip check on Caitlin Clark. During that media session, Angel Reese made the comment that people weren't just watching one player, they were watching her too. That quote immediately became one of the biggest talking points of the season. Looking back now, it hasn't exactly aged particularly well because people still reference it today whenever discussions about Caitlin Clark and league popularity come up. Whether people agreed with Angel Reese or disagreed with her, that interview became part of the larger conversation almost immediately. Now we're seeing another situation where players and coaches seem more interested in defending controversial actions than simply acknowledging what happened. Meanwhile, there were basketball analysts, including people from No Cap Space, who openly admitted the play looked intentional. Some even said it was clearly dirty. But then those same conversations quickly shifted towards saying the suspension itself was somehow unnecessary because it would keep the narrative alive. That doesn't make much sense to me. The league isn't supposed to base disciplinary decisions on whether Twitter gets upset. The league isn't supposed to ask whether First Take might spend another segment discussing the incident. The only question should be whether the play deserved punishment. If the answer is yes, then you issue the punishment. That's how professional sports have always worked. I've also seen people argue that officials shouldn't retroactively suspend players. Again, that argument doesn't really hold up. Professional sports have been reviewing plays after games for decades. Whether it's basketball, football, soccer, hockey, or any other major league, retroactive discipline exists for a reason. Officials sometimes miss things during live action. That's exactly why leagues review footage afterward. It's nothing new. I also think part of the problem is that some fans only follow the WNBA. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you watch multiple professional sports, you quickly realize that post-game suspensions happen all the time. They're actually very common. So acting like this is some unprecedented situation simply isn't accurate. For me personally, I've watched the WNBA for years, long before 2024. I've watched hundreds of games over the years, and I still think this suspension was one of the easier decisions the league has had to make. The optics were simply bad. Trying to defend actions that involved jumping on another player, making contact with the groin area, catching someone around the throat during the sequence, and then appearing to stomp afterward is never going to look good. That's why I honestly thought the story would end once the suspension became official. Instead, we've now got players, coaches, and social media personalities continuing to argue that Alyssa Thomas has somehow become the victim. That's the part I simply don't understand, because at some point, responsibility has to matter. If players aren't held accountable for unnecessary physical plays, then what message does that send moving forward? That's why I think the league had no choice but to act. Whether people like the decision or not, doing absolutely nothing would have created an even bigger controversy. As for what's going to happen the next time Alyssa Thomas plays against Caitlin Clark, we'll have to wait and see. Personally, I hope nothing happens. I hope both players simply play basketball. I hope the conversation becomes about basketball instead of unnecessary physical incidents, because that's ultimately what fans want to watch. They want to watch great players compete. They don't want another controversy dominating headlines for an entire week. So we'll see what happens the next time the Fever and Alyssa Thomas share the floor. Hopefully the basketball becomes the biggest story instead of another disciplinary decision. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think the WNBA handled the Alyssa Thomas suspension correctly? Or do you think the league should have handled it differently? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.